I think we're ready to begin. Sorry for the delay. We should still have plenty of time. I'd like to welcome you to the Stockholm School of Economics here in Riga for this very important discussion on the future of Europe after the British referendum to Brexit or leave the EU, and amid other challenges such as the migration crisis and terrorism, or as the title of this afternoon's discussion puts it, upholding the European project in a time of uncertainty. This 3+1 foreign ministers from Baltic states and Germany debate comes ahead of a really critical summit in Bratislava on Friday on the question of where now for the EU. So we're going to be beginning that debate. My name is Bruno Waterfield. I am the Brussels correspondent of the Times of London newspaper. I will be moderating the debate today, and even with starting a bit late, there should be some time for discussion and your questions. I'd also like to welcome our online audience and people who are watching the discussion from downstairs. If you are using Twitter, the hashtag is Riga3+1, R-I-G-A, number 3, P-L-U-S, number 1. First, let me introduce our distinguished and exciting panel in the order in which they will speak. First of all, opening the discussion will be Edgars Alinkevič, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. Secondly, we'll be hearing from Dr. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Germany. Then we will be hearing from Linas Linkevičius, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. And last but not least, we'll be hearing from Matti Masikas, Deputy Minister of EU Affairs of Estonia. The questions that our panel have been asked to address are big ones. There's some of the existential issues facing the European Union, and some of the questions and issues and challenges that people will be grappling with in Bratislava this week. So how will Brexit change the European Union? What will its implications be for the EU and the EU as one of the most important foreign actors on the world stage? What needs to be done in order to nurture and develop the European project and Europe's values? How do you see the future of the EU? What role should the Baltic Sea region play in this process? The ministers will speak for 5 minutes each. We'll have a bit of panel interaction, and then it'll be over to you, the audience. Mr. Rinkevič, could you please begin?
And you really want every one of us to answer all those questions in 5 minutes? That's
to begin to.
That's very challenging. And I think that's also quite of symbolism that we are moderated today by the Times of London about all the consequences that now EU is facing after the Brexit referendum. But on a more serious note, I think that I'll just begin this kind of discussion by some points. The first point, I think that Brexit has shown that there is one important thing that all of us, regardless either that's South and North, East and West in Europe, should address, and that's regaining public trust in the European Union. We have actually spent today a couple of hours of discussing what could be done, what should be done, and I also want to a little bit challenge your kind of introduction or advertisement for Bratislava. Bratislava is only beginning of debate. I frankly would have some management of expectations. I think that there will be more questions put on the table in Bratislava, less answers provided, but it will kick up the most important process of reflection and also the way forward. And then, well, most probably, if everything goes well, then maybe by the 60th anniversary of Rome Treaty, we should have some more clarity. That's where I would caution no huge expectations from Bratislava. It's only beginning of road. It's not the end. And then Second point I want to mention is that I think that most of our publics are now caring about two major issues. One is security. Citizens of EU are worried about their security, be it fight against terrorism, be it all the implications we are seeing from the very challenging neighborhood in the east and south of Europe. We want to see more control of our external borders. We want to see more coordination when it comes to migratory policies, when it comes to the fight against terrorism. Well, we want to see more defense cooperation, but I think that here you will hear a lot of interesting views. I would be rather skeptical about European army, but I would be very much advocating more structured, more targeted defense cooperation. And second, it's about economy, it's about jobs, it's about youth employment. We in Latvia want to see certain developments when it comes to energy union, digital union, when it comes to the better functioning of single market, also better management of Eurozone. So those are issues that we would love to see as being developed. I don't think that we are going to see any revolutionary approaches. I don't expect that, some kind of grand vision will be something that we can agree at 27 or, let's say, at Bratislava or beyond summit. But what I think that, which is very important, that we have incremental, tireless work actually to address some of the shortfalls of the Union.
Mr. Steinmeier.
I think everybody knows that the EU is facing decisive times, being limited now to 5 minutes. Let me raise some very few issues. First of all, I think we shouldn't mix up two different discussions which are linked but not the same. This is the discussion about Brexit on the one side, and the other discussion is about renewing the European Union. Fortunately, it's not linked, because you remember during the campaigns in the United Kingdom for the Brexit or for the remaining in the European Union, there were some anticipations that after the referendum and after the majority for the Brexit, this will create a sort of domino effect inside the European Union. That has not happened. On contrary, perhaps, we were just discussing during lunch that, in contrary, the support for the membership in the European Union has increased after the British referendum in the 27 member states, most of the 27 member states. But I do not overestimate these polls or these surveys, because we shouldn't hide away. Europe is in a real crisis, and we don't know yet, and I'm not able to anticipate when and how we are overcoming this crisis in which we are. Starting the discussion about renewing the European Union, I think we should understand the British referendum as a sort of wake-up call for the 27 member states, and we have to enter in a serious discussion what has to be renewed in the European Union. And I just was telling my colleagues very different experiences during the first phase of discussions between European foreign ministers, and I think they are quite similar on the level of prime ministers, chancellors, and presidents. Meaning, I had some meetings with Western European members who were saying, this is indeed a wake-up call, and now we have to be courageous. We have to prepare for the next serious step for further integration of the European Union. And my question is, do we have the legitimacy for that? And there are others who are saying, yes, this is a wake-up call, and that means we have to rethink the process of integration, and first of all, think about and discuss the changing of the treaties. my answer to that, where are we ending when we are now in the middle of crisis, entering in a discussion about changing of the treaties. So therefore, neither the way for next courageous steps towards integration is a solution, nor starting the discussion about changing the treaties. We have to find answers along the way Edgar's was pointing out. And I think what we have to do now, in the very few weeks and months until the celebration of 60 years Roman treaties, we have to give answers on those issues in those political fields in which we were not succeeding during the last year and years. And that indeed is migration policy, that is security, and perhaps not here, but in the whole Mediterranean world of the European Union, is the expectation to answers to employment and growth. So therefore, from my point of view, these are the three main issues, the three main fields in which we have to organize answers and meeting the expectations of the populations in the European member state. That is our duty now for the next weeks and months, and I hope we will succeed.
Thank you. Mr. Linkevicius.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I liked terminology Frank Walter used, wake-up call, because the question is how many wake-up calls needed to wake up. It depends on personality. For us Europeans, usually one wake-up call is not enough. What I can say, drawing from the Russian aggression in Ukraine, or be it Brexit, sometimes we need more. But nevertheless, it's obvious that after what happened, we all, and Europe is different. And we have to draw lessons. I agree with that. But draw lessons not only out of the outcome and the result, but also the process, how democracy works. Recalling and reminding what were the questions during the campaign before breakfast, Brexit, after the breakfast. It was lunch now, yeah? Okay. It was very good lunch, by the way. What did I say before? Yeah, but recalling what were the questions raised by Brits, actually, when we were talking about lack of competitiveness, right? They talked about the gap between citizens and European institutions. They talked about trust of the citizens. All these questions are valid. All these questions are still on the table. And if we'll think or we'll pretend that nothing happened after what happened, that would be a big mistake. So we have to draw the lessons. Also about the process. I believe that even now, at least colleagues probably also talking to British friends, and some of them, they don't know what happened. When they're asking what you're going to do, how far away you're going to go, they also don't know. Some of them, those who voted in favor of Brexit, they don't know how European institutions working. You know, many elementary questions, and is it not too late to raise these questions? Of course, too late. But not too late for us to draw the lessons, how democracy works. Sometimes referendums organized, and people, they're not informed what they're going to do, what they're going to decide. Not only this referendum, let me briefly just mention referendum in Netherlands, where some country was taken as a hostage, Ukraine, and the organizers, we're not denying that they don't care about the Ukrainian case, but the point was just to punish own government or Brussels or bureaucracy. Again, is it democracy? Is it really how we would expect to that's also something should be drawn from all that. So really very important. And more to say, when in physics, there's a vacuum, it's filled by something immediately. And my feeling that sometimes when we're prevailing this wait-and-see approach in whatever happening in the world, wait-and-see is very comfortable. This is filled immediately by something. And that means lack of leadership. Lack of leadership to take decisions on time, to take decisions when it is necessary, not too late or not too little. Again, let's think, are we really capable to do that in the future? And then we will see, there will be no chain reaction, there will be nothing like that, but it's not a done deal. It's not a given. It depends on how we will react. So A very interesting point, but there are definitely more challenges around. Brexit, terrorism, migration, everything at the same time. No one promised it will be easy, so we cannot complain. But we should take it as a realistic situation and to take on board all these issues. And frankly, it's a test of unity, test of our cohesion, test of the values we are declaring. Are we really going to defend these values or just to declare? Many aspects coming at the same time. And even if it's after the breakfast, but very important. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Masikas.
Thank you. I think a departure of a member state, especially of a big member state, that exposes you to some fundamental, even existential questions about the architecture of the whole union, inevitable questions that formerly were unthinkable. So, and in that sense, for me, probably the main thing to observe vis-à-vis the Bratislava meeting, or the start of the beginning of the EU's response to this challenge posed by the Brexit vote, is to observe, is to how do the leaders of the 27 member states convey this message that not everything is perfect in the EU, not everything has gone rightly in the EU. To what extent are we able to say that we need to do something different? If not, if that will not be not the message but part of the message, the EU will be continuously under anti-globalization pressure, under the pressure of this anti-globalization wave, which is by no means unique for Europe. It's, if you look at what's happening in the United States, it's the same, and it's no surprise. If you read the new book of the economist Branko Milanovic, The Global Inequality, the globalization has very effectively decreased inequality between the countries, but within rich countries, inequality is on the rise, and that poses very legitimate questions for our citizens. On the European continent, the EU is all about the globalization. The EU embodies everything about the globalization. We have experienced that when, for instance, Estonia joined the EU. There was much talk about how the relations between Estonia and Finland, our closest neighbor from the then existing member states, how it will work, how the workers, people will cross the border, how the trade will go, people coming, buying cheaper goods and so on. Probably the same kind of phenomena on some parts of the German border with Poland and Czech Republic. And the answer, of course, is that this is a globalization in miniature. If we don't manage even that, then what do we manage? So the main question for the months and years to come for the EU is how to remain open, how to retain this openness, while at the same time giving the citizens the feeling of being secure, being protected. And in that sense, one thing very important to observe, how will the European leaders, how will the European Council in October discuss the issue of trade, which is under constant pressure all over the European continent. So I agree with the previous speakers that most probably no big headlines, no new big integration steps will solve the issues. Does not accord to the zeitgeist, but rather concrete steps for the citizens' good. Control of borders, fighting terrorism, and in the field of economy, of course, strengthening and deepening the single market, services market, and not least the digital single market. Of course, the leaders, the political elites in all member states need to have quite a new type of dialogue with the citizens about the globalizations, about the EU, and there is this need to dare to make the positive case for the EU, something that was badly missing in the Brexit debate in the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for being amazingly on time. I'm extremely impressed. Foreign Affairs Councils are obviously a well-oiled machine. I'd just like to ask you all, though, a question about, there's a very big European politics story this morning that sort of gets to the heart of some of these discussions. Jean Asselborn, the foreign minister Luxembourg, speaking to Die Welt, a German newspaper, said that he would like to see a country like Hungary, which he sees as having massively violated European values, as being suspended from the EU, and he'd like to see the unanimity rule on so-called Article 7 for that procedure changed, presumably as part of this process. So I just wanted to get a response from any of you who would like to make a response on that particular issue, bearing in mind that Viktor Orban in Poland last week said that he wanted to use this discussion and Brexit, a fantastic opportunity. He called it for a quote, cultural counter-revolution.
You know, there was already a question in the press conference this morning, so we had an obligation to answer this question already. And you know, although Jean Asselborn is a close friend of all of us, we are differing in this position. We all know that there is a serious discussion between the Commission and the Hungarian government, between member states and the Hungarian government. But I think we have to discuss the complications very seriously with Orban and his government. But from my point of view, the way out is not to urge Hungary to withdraw from the European Union or to give the message that we are not willing to keep them in. So therefore, I think we have to pay respect that countries are members of the European Union and that we have to deal with the governments.
Okay. Well, let me put it to the Baltic states in a slightly different way. The Visegrad 4 grouping has now got a reputation for being quite confrontational. You like working in this 3+1 format, the NB8 format, which is takes a different approach. So I wondered if you had a comment on the way in which the Visegrad group is increasingly confrontational, and whether that is helpful in the present context.
No, frankly, we should spare more time in talking to each other, with each other, not about each other, and also to avoid these public statements, as we said during the press conference as well. And obvious, this is a need, and there are more issues to be answered, to be raised, and there are some initiatives, and all these groups, meetings, they should provide some added value to all our 28 until now, or 27 later. To improve this cohesion, and frankly, everything is valid and worthwhile if it really adds value to this. If it's adding to the differences, separations, it's always wrong. But there are some questions simply needed more insight, more analysis. Sometimes when you're talking after that, you see that outcome is the same. You see that, frankly, maybe different arguments used, maybe different priorities given. We should really calm down a bit, because a lot of challenges already, as we agreed, around, sufficient for us to face them together, and really to avoid these harsh and radical statements, which will not help. So I agree with them. I have no doubt Jean Asselborn, he had maybe good ideas behind, because he was talking about values we all have to defend. We are ready to talk about that. Frankly, plenty of opportunities to talk about that. Are we doing that in practice or not? So let's discuss.
Well, I think that we all should remember that kind of regional groups have been existing many years. We have Nordic-Baltic format, which actually includes also two non-EU states like Norway and Iceland. As NB8, we meet at least once a year with Visegrad countries. By the way, I see also some future in a format that has been established a couple of years ago, which is NB8 plus UK. We have this format, we are meeting at least once a year, which is Baltic-German. And then there are also Benelux-Baltic meetings. So you see that actually we try to discuss many issues in different formats. What is very important is that while it is inevitable that in the Union of now 28, soon 27, that we have commonality of interest where sometimes geographical issues overlap, sometimes not. But what is important is that at the end of the day, actually those decisions that are relevant to the whole Union are being taken by all member states. So from that point of view, I wouldn't make tragedy for that or another grouping. Now about Visegrad countries. Look, I think that they have their position. We have seen sometimes that some views of leaders of those countries differ from our views. For instance, let's take a look at the debate on sanctions against Russia vis-à-vis Ukraine. Out of Visegrad 4, there is at least one country that is fiercely defending that, and two that are actually saying that it's time to reconsider. In this format, we have a bit different point of view. So I think that we will have also in future this difference of opinion, which is normal. It's normal also in one nation state that you have different parties arguing everything. But then it is very important that when the critical decision-making time comes, we come to the kind of trade-off.
Coming from this part of Europe, I think the fear of being excluded, being left out, is your worst nightmare. And that applies the other direction as well. It also makes you pretty sensitive to the thoughts of exclude somebody. So I think in this crisis will not be solved by big headlines to either direction, nor the big new integration steps, nor then excluding somebody or further reducing the number of member states in that sense. And as Edgar's just pointed out, many of these there are many, not even maybe groupings, but discussion rounds and clubs of member states coming together, discussing issues. It's all right until somebody will be demonstratively excluded from these discussions.
Okay. Just moving on to another area which is likely to be a centrepiece of this discussion, which is the question related to the question of security, which is that of European military cooperation, not an EU army. We are always told. Mr. Steinmeier, could you outline for us a little bit about how you would address concerns about some of these permanent structures, military headquarters in Brussels, could end up in competition with or rivaling NATO? And I know that some diplomats were uneasy with the paper that you produced with Jean-Marc Ayrault in June that didn't even mention NATO. So could you address some of those concerns, particularly here in the 3+1 format with frontline countries?
Yeah, the paper you're referring to was a paper about EU, so therefore you shouldn't be surprised that NATO was not the main issue in this paper. But back to security. I think this is one field, one issue that people have very clear expectations. And in former days, yes, there was a discussion inside Europe if European security policy might be in competition with NATO. I think the discussion has changed during the last years, and not only, but perhaps with new dynamics after the Brexit. You saw perhaps the last paper of the two defense ministers of France and Germany, and they have pointed out some more details about possible European security cooperation. We all know, and we discussed it this morning, that the way to a European army is far away. Edgars was saying he don't see the need for that. I'm a member of a party in which the European army is since more than 30 years part of our party program. So therefore, in the longer perspective, there are different views inside the European parties and governments. What I was saying this morning, the European army is far away, but the way ahead is something which is important. So I'm completely convinced that the people, our populations, are expecting closer cooperation in the field of security, including defense. And so therefore we shouldn't be shy.
Yes, please. Yes.
Now, it's very important to realize what we would like to achieve. And we touched upon earlier during our conversation, I reminded when we were about to establish European Defence Agency, it was a competition about terminology. There were also two groups. One group wanted to have European Capabilities Agency, another group wanted to have European Procurement Agency. So what we'd like to achieve, to add capabilities, or to promote procurement, or to do something else. In this regard, whatever we will do, European cooperation making stronger, will be stronger, especially it's obvious for small countries, by the way, also for the big ones, but for the small especially, to avoid these duplications. We as members of NATO, members of EU, frankly speaking, we will be happy to take part in the missions, regardless which flag is. The European Union or NATO depends on the mission. And we would like to have capabilities compatible to both of these organizations. Same standardization procedures, for instance. As a former defense minister, I can say this is very, very simple as it sounds, but not so simple in the practice, because we're always not competing, but sometimes, trying to emphasize this subordination issue. Who is more important, who is more relevant? No, it should be really, with all respect to the taxpayers also, not only for the practical means. We have really to avoid these competitions. I remember, and you probably do as well, there was discussion some time ago about EU headquarters in Tervuren. It's already done. It's already discussed. There were arguments provided, do we need HQ, which is a few kilometers from HQ of NATO? Do we need that? And the answer was no. Now again, we are raising these issues, and frankly, it's really very important to focus on the capabilities building, to focus on the added value, to add efforts, and whatever we will do, it will strengthen our cooperation within NATO, it will be for good. If we'll split or do something as a competition or duplication, it will be bad. So we have to look at this very practical point of view.
Okay.
Well, much has been said, and thank you, Frank-Walter, that you outlined our discussion where I said that I really do not see any value for the European army right now. There are so many challenges we are facing now as the NATO member state after Warsaw decisions, resources that we have to invest into implementation of those decisions. There are many issues that are related to decision making, and the main issue would be what's the purpose of the army? To defend European Union, or to be the kind of expeditionary force for the kind of EU-led operations? Who would make decisions? Can we realistically imagine that any of national parliaments, especially right now, would delegate decision-making to European Parliament. Well, I don't believe to that. However, and frankly, what Lina said, also this kind of possible competition between NATO and the EU is not a good idea. However, I would say that we would be very ready to explore deeper defense cooperation, be it industries, be it real operational planning, and if as a result of this process, of this exercise, we can probably for the first time to deploy EU battle group, somewhere in EU-led operation, if we could be able to show that it's not only ad hoc decision making every time when we decide on operation, then we are scrambling for resources, both financial, military and so on. But if we could actually, again, in a kind of incremental way, to show the value of already what has been achieved through better cooperation and coordination, then I would say that we would achieve some certain goals. So I would say that yes, exploring deeper cooperation in defense field, but no to the creation of some kind of phantoms that unfortunately will not be delivering what we want to see. And frankly, we unfortunately have two projects that have not been completed, Eurozone and Schengen Zone. We all understand that we created it, it works, but because of some structural inconsistencies, be it external borders not being, let's say, guarded according to the same standard, some issues we had to address during financial crisis in 2008, 2011, when it comes to Eurozone, we still have many challenges also with the existing things. So I'm not rather, the grand visionary. I'm very kind of down-to-earth guy at this time and at this debate.
Okay. Before going out to you, the audience, start getting ready for your questions, I just want to do a very, very quick round of questions on trade. Obviously, the sort of Brexit event and negotiations that will to come will inevitably concentrate our minds on trade, the problems of TTIP, the question of trade following American presidential elections, America's trade agreements in the Pacific Asia area. Now, trade seems to be very, very important. If you talk to particularly German industrialists, they are desperate for TTIP, but there seems to be a popular reaction on the social democratic side as well. So is trade a really big economic issue in the coming period, and how do we address this issue of public trust? That seems to be an area where the public doesn't really believe the economic benefits that come from trade. How do you address that disjuncture?
We have a very heated debate in Germany, and sometimes I don't know if we are still, in a political debate, or are we discussing about questions of belief? Because I'm sometimes really desperate that those who are opposing the discussion about free trade and free trade agreements are not really listening to the arguments and not listening what has changed during the negotiations, especially with Canada when we were negotiating the CETA agreement. That was the reason why I was publishing an article last Saturday in the German newspapers by pointing out, regarding the German economy, which is already now based mainly on export, we cannot take a German principled position to be against free trade. Regarding the demographic situation, in Germany we cannot rely on domestic demand in the next future. I think export will become even more relevant in the next future. So therefore, You cannot take a principled position against free trade. What you can do is you can compare different free trade agreements. And doing that, I think it's fair to say that we have reached in our negotiations with Canada, we have reached some significant progress. And we have given answers to those who were skeptical in the past. And we are not yet there with our negotiations with the US when we are talking about TTIP. So therefore, I think what I'm trying to give as a message in the German public is regarding the CETA agreement with Canada, I think we are there. We are keeping our values, we are keeping our standards, and we have a partner on the Canadian side who is negotiating in the same direction. Regarding TTIP, we discussed it during lunch. It's not easy to explain where we are. If there is really still a strong will on the American side to negotiate until the end of the period, until the end of the present administration, or if the American administration under Obama is avoiding any kind of burden on the shoulders of the next administration. So therefore, to be honest, and regarding the status of negotiations, I don't expect that the negotiations will be finished during the present administration. Then we have to wait for the outcome of the elections and see if the next government, if the next administration is eager to reassume the negotiations.
Mr. Masikas.
Yes, thanks. Trade is a case in point in two ways. First, being the sign, the effect of the globalization that people see in their everyday life. Those mainly blue-collar workers who are in risk of losing their jobs to cheaper countries. But it's also a case in point in a way that trade is a core union EU competence. So, and it's an area that the EU has always been able to deliver. Now this is compromised as well. And I don't see any other way than for the political elites of the member states coming out and making the case for trade with comparable passion and conviction of those who are opposing it. There is no other way. It's also one of the lessons of the Brexit debate in the UK.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to take some questions from the audience. I've already got the gentleman here. Can you stick your hands up, please? And can you be really concise? If you can stick to around a minute, we can take a bank of 5 questions, and then we can bring the ministers in to answer them all. And then the gentleman here, the microphone.
Thank you. I'm Ojas Kalniņš. I'm chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Latvian Parliament. You've talked about internal pressures that are creating stress within the European Union. I'm curious about external pressures, the outside forces that may be trying to promote this unity. We know that the U.S. supports a strong European Union. I was in China last month. They're very disappointed by Brexit, want to see a stronger EU. At the same time, Daesh and international terrorism is actively trying to create chaos in the EU, and we know Moscow also is trying to promote this unity, especially in terms of sanctions. Are these forces uniting Europe, or are they actually succeeding in creating greater differences between the EU countries? Thank you.
Gentleman here, can you stand up and say who you are as well, please? Thank you.
My name is Tim Colley. I'm the head of mission in the British Embassy here, so perhaps appropriate for me to be amongst the first to ask a question. I would first like to say thank you very much for the constructive tone of the discussion of the Brexit vote. the UK has decided to leave the EU, we're not leaving Europe, and we want to build as close a relationship with our European partners as possible for the future. One way to read Brexit vote is that it revealed a great deal of concern about migration and migration within the EU. I'm conscious that communities from the Baltic states are amongst our best communities, contribute to our social life and to our economy enormously, but it means that some of the Baltic countries have lost some of their best and brightest people, and that causes some problems here. So I would welcome your reflections on how to cope with that challenge to make it something that works well for everybody.
Thank you. Can we take this microphone up to the back there? Can you put your hand up so they can see you? Woman in the purple top. Are there anyone else who wants to ask a question? Yes, go ahead.
Is it on?
It is.
Okay. Maria Golubov, a policy analyst from Riga. Well, listening to what is expected from the future, so to say, Bratislava and further, I had the impression that it's all about salvaging what we've got. And I understand the realistic situation is like that. But for the citizens, I think it's very important to hear what do they stand to gain in the future from the European Union. Because the anti-EU message is very strong, the anti-globalization message, as was rightly pointed out, is very strong, and it's all about you will lose this and you will lose that. And then what the EU does, what the EU leaders do, is they say, well, no, if you vote for those populists, you will also lose. So what do EU citizens stand to gain? Okay, digital market, what else? Okay, thank you very much. The gentleman here at the front, and then can that microphone go along to the gentleman there with glasses? Please.
Okay. I'm Alexandros Realis, broadcaster from Greenland. You said that answers have to be provided to meet the expectations of Mediterranean countries for migration, employers and growth. Until now, there was a feeling that Europe has to do more for burden sharing. Are you going to work towards that direction?
Thank you. Gentleman there at the back. Is there anybody else at all with a... Yes. And then the woman there in the blue top. Can you keep your hand up for the microphone? Thank you.
Hello, Leo Dieter. My name, I'm an exchange student here. And my question is, we were discussing a lot about economic issues right now. But how about cultural... how do European countries try to address the, let's say, cultural integration within the European Union? Not only talking about TTIP and the economic point, but how do European citizens try to, what's your proposal of cultural integration?
Thank you. Woman over here.
Hello, Janet Ozolany, I'm professor of the University of Latvia. I'm looking at the title of the discussion at the European Project in Type of Uncertainty, and recently a debated EU global strategy was a document which was supposed to some extent to answer what is uncertainty in terms of international environment. So do you agree with Madam Mogherini, who said that this document will help to implement foreign and security policy of the European Union, because so far it looks that the debate is very low because of Brexit?
Okay, now I know we're not supposed to cherry pick in the European Union, but what I'd like you to do is cherry pick and come back on some of these questions. Please take around about 2 minutes, and then that will bring us to the end of this event in any order in which you choose to speak.
If I can start.
Yeah.
Well, try briefly. External pressure, whether it's unites us or whatever. So I would say both. It depends on the situation. Partially, it unites us, making us to show more solidarity. On the other hand, the challenges all the time and testing whether we are really standing firm on what we're supposed to do. And this is really both. So it's balance of this. About EU is and I hope it will be the major player in the world, be it in political area or in the trade, by the way. This is really the case, and it will be disunited, it will really break this unity, we will be not so impressive. And frankly, also we can do a lot in trade. I skipped this comment on trade, but I believe trade is the key. For us in Lithuania, we are a trade nation. 80% of our GDP based on export, on free trade, so very much in favor for free trade. And I see so many misleading arguments sometimes, false arguments, and we have really to take a very proactive approach in this regard and to defend. I believe it's important also in Germany. By the way, it's important in UK. It will be a big challenge, and time will come, and those who were for Brexit will have to explain to own public. It will be big blow to the budget. So all these issues have to do with that. Okay, short.
Brilliant.
Well, also cherry picking to some extent. I think Linus answered quite well about the external pressures, about migration issues and internal migration issues and all the lessons learned. When I'm speaking about the kind of challenge for EU to address key concerns of citizens, economy, jobs, I definitely include also the continuation of our efforts to get the kind of cohesion of the whole union. We still have quite disparities, let's say, between United Kingdom and Latvia, Germany and Estonia. And the sooner we reach the kind of average living standards, then I think we could also partly address our own internal migratory pressures, and to some extent also that's the answer to what Mrs. Golubeva has asked, what citizens can gain. I have two parts of the answer. The first, let's not underestimate what we already have, and we really take so many things for granted. The peace and stability, even with all the challenges of terrorism, but we still have never enjoyed such, let's say, a stable environment as we have now in centuries. For Latvia, if you look at statistics, even 20 years, compare 1996 with 2016, you've seen that actually the level of economic development, of living standards is increasing. Yes, we all want to see that it increases much quicker, that we all live as in the most developed countries, but it takes time. So all those energy unions, digital unions, everything are only tools actually to show that we still have a lot to gain. And the last one I really want to say about global strategies, global security strategy. Yeah, so it happens that actually High Representative was mandated to submit her global strategy to the European Council in June, a couple of days after Brexit referendum. However, in Gimnich meeting in Bratislava, we were discussing the implementation plan of the strategy. And I think that all those elements that Federica Mogherini has put in the plan, those would help to further develop not only, the kind of foreign policy union, but also tools to implement it. The only trouble that probably, and I suggested her to do it, that she needs to present this implementation plan not only to foreign ministers, but also to ministers of finance.
Thank you.
A short answer to the young man on the gallery up there, because he was asking, why are you talking about economics? And I think this is, first of all, a misunderstanding. Yes, we were talking about trade and free trade agreements, but remember my last answer, I'm not talking and I'm not focusing mainly on trade and economics. This is a question of politics and political culture, because remember when I was saying, nobody is really willing and ready to listen to arguments. I think the reason for that is that the people have become skeptical if governments and even the European Commission are controlling the situation. And the loss of control is something which is leading to a sort of Euroscepticism. And we have to reconfirm our people, our populations that, back to national governments will not mean that we are regaining control about the present situation. I think only the European Union, that is, my point of view, only the European Union can make us relevant in this complex world. And so therefore, even if it's difficult, and even if it needs some time, I think reconvening on the level of the European Union, bridging the gaps between different understanding, positions and interests, at the end, I think, will lead us to a situation in which the European position is remaining relevant in this new and modern world. Without that, back to national governments, I think, is not the solution. So it's not only about economics. It's about the understanding what it is, the European Union, and from my point of view, we have gained something during the last 60 years, not lost.
Thank you. As much as I may distaste the cherry-picking approach, it's still better than the Christmas tree approach that everybody who has worked in Brussels knows all too well. So first on the immigration, I served as Estonian ambassador to Finland at the time that Estonia joined the EU, and I faced dozens, if not hundreds, of these kinds of questions. Would it not be good for yourselves if your people would not come to Finland, if your people would not emigrate? My answer was always the same. I made my first foreign trips in the 1980s, still at the time where I needed a permission to leave the country. So, and that's something we wanted and still want to be free of. So, if the background of the question was that since it's in your own interests to not letting your people leave, so let's put up some mechanisms to avoid that. So my answer is no. It's the way we want it. Of course, we appreciate if people, by their choices, choose stay. But there is no way, probably, we could enter any kind of discussions to end. The second thing, what was there to gain? Only digital single market. According to some surveys, digital single market could bring up to 4% increase in the GDP. That's quite good enough. There are times you are on the offensive, want to gain something. There are times you are in the defensive. The title of this panel is Upholding the European Project. If we uphold it, we are quite successful already.
Thank you. I think it's what's very, very clear, and it's been quite explicitly stated, is this is the beginning of a discussion, it's the beginning of a debate, probably the most exciting as well as challenging debate in recent times. This debate here this afternoon has given us all plenty to think about and to discuss, and it's been made clear that involvement, participation in this discussion will be vital, in that, along the lines of that principle, let's continue the discussion downstairs over some sparkling wine. Because I could just ask you to sit. First, we let the ministers leave, and then we can join them. And when they're on their way out, if you could thank the ministers for, one, sticking to their speaking times, but also being very engaging. Thank you. Thank you.